Dr. Phil and Joe Rogan talking about UBI without a clue as to what they're talking about.
Before we get really started, like, this is what I hate about Joe Rogan and the prominence he has is like the fetishization of long form podcasts. Talk about our show making people unproductive. You listen to 3 hours of Joe Rogan talking to Dr. Phil and then another 3 hours of Joe Rogan talking to Kid Rock, and you've wasted a third of a day. Oh, fourth of a day.
Never mind. You've wasted time. Your understanding of things have been set back, maybe months, if not years.
You've demented yourself.
You have, like, it's going to take you a long time to unlearn that stuff.
Equality of outcome is, there are a lot more liberal professors in college than there are conservative professors.
A lot more.
Because the liberal professors don't want to get out in the real world and compete. So they go to the university where they don't have to compete the way they do in the real world.
All right, pause it for 1 second. First off, Dr. Phil doesn't know how schools work or applications to jobs. The reason why there are more liberal professors than there are conservative professors, to the extent that that's true, and it really is a function in many respects of the department you're talking about. But to the extent that that's true, it's because liberals may do a little more reading and be interested in academics more.
Yeah, it's a skill issue.
Exactly. And an interest. Like, I think Dr. Phil has stumbled upon a quality about conservatives that he doesn't want to acknowledge. Yeah. It's possible. But the idea that they don't want to go out into the, they don't want to go out into the real world and compete, like as if 90% of the world, like, what's the competition here? Am I going to be a better underwriter than the underwriter sitting next to me at the insurance company? Like, are we in competition? How many people actually who are out in the working world are in competition? You think the construction workers over here are like going to be like, I'm going to rivet this better than Bill over there. They're just doing their jobs. But for Dr. Phil, it's all about competition because he's a guy who's pretended he's like a doctor on TV.
Yeah.
We want to talk about cush jobs. Go ahead.
Where they don't have to compete the way they do in the real world. But that being said, here's the thing. If you are going to an Ivy League school, and so you're paying $200,000 for this elite education, and then they teach the goal is equality of outcome, then why do I need an elite education? If the goal is equality of outcome, why am I paying you $200,000 for this elite education?
Here's a question. Why do you need an education? Why do you need an education at all? Like, why not just go, or I should say, why do you need an education where you're actually reading literature or studying like stuff that you don't use in your job in competing with your car sales from the guy next to it? Like, why aren't you going to a vocational school? Like, this is the dumbest, like one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Yeah. First off, like, there's no value to education to this Nimrod outside of what can make him a buck.
Yes, this is not.
Which is exactly what you want from a psychology PhD.
Yeah. This is not a doctor. This is a grifter, and like there might, and I just say like there might be less conservative teachers in academia for the same reason there are less anti-trans doctors in medicine. It's because they're morons.
Exactly. Go ahead.
Outcome, why am I paying you $200,000 for this elite education? If the goal is equality of outcome, why don't I go get in a beanbag and eat the Cheetos? Why am I paying you $200,000?
Well, that's what scares me about a universal basic income. I used to think that was a really good idea until I saw the way people responded when they got checks during the pandemic, and especially people that got unemployment. They did not want to go back to work.
Well, no.
They did not want to go back to work. And the idea, the beautiful part of the idea is that if you gave people enough money for food and shelter, then they could pursue their dreams. Some will do that, but how many are we going to lose if you give people that? How many, if you can take away incentive, how many people are never going to get their ass in gear? That's a number two.
Well, I can't quote you
Pause
the
it for a
exact
second.
numbers.
Like, I mean, the idea that not enough. This is all made up. Definitely. Some people were like, I don't want to go in and work my crappy job as long as I have support
And to care for my family.
and think about what those jobs were. Then all of a sudden, when Joe goes out to eat at a restaurant because he's making so much money, he's not going to have the proper service that he requires. All he's talking about is if we don't have, he's not worried about like there won't be innovation. The people who are staying home were not people who are like, I have a really great engaging job, but I don't want to go in because I'm getting a piddling amount from the government to cover me staying at home because I'm getting unemployment. I had a great job, but I don't want to go back in because I'm on unemployment. No, when people like this complain, when two ultra rich guys get together to complain about this, and not just capitalists, really rich, 100 millionaires get together and they're complaining about people sitting on their beanbag and eating Cheetos. What they're complaining is the worker drones aren't going to be around to service me.
Yep.
And they need to be extorted. They need to have precarious lives where they don't know if they can provide health insurance for their kids, where they don't know if they're going to be able to provide a roof over their head for their kids or themselves, where they don't know if they're going to be able to have health care. They don't know if they're going to be able to retire with any dignity, where they're not going to be eating cat food. We need to keep them insecure. Otherwise, when I go out to a restaurant, I may not have the waiter I want. Or when it's time for me to go buy my Bugatti or whatever it is, I may not have a guy who's going to be prepared to clean it.
Yep.
That's exactly what they're complaining about.
Obedience through deprivation. And I'll just say Joe Rogan co-founded Onnit Labs, which he sold to Unilever in 2001. That company got a $2.4 million forgiven under the PPP loan program.
That's a number too.
Well, I can't quote you the exact numbers, but I can tell you the
Because they
trend,
don't
and that
exist.
is the longer you're off work, the less likely you are to ever return to work. And I can tell you why the research says that's true. And these are people that have legitimate injuries, for example. I mean, truly have a back injury at work or something where they have to have fusions and that sort of thing. You adjust your world. Your world shrinks. First off, your identity changes. Maybe you were a welder or a bus driver or something. That was a big part of your identity. Now your identity becomes patient. Your social world, your friends become fellow patients. You get up every day and you go to rehab, to back rehab, and you're doing all these exercises. You're going to the doctor. They become your friends. Your world shrinks down. You adjust. You say, well, we're going to have to get by with one car. I can't drive anyway. You'll have to drive me. We can sell one car, keep one car. Your world shrinks down. You adjust to it. You're still watching your football team on the weekends on TV. You're living on less money, and you adapt. You adjust. And you get used to that. And now everybody thought, for example, at the end of the lockdown.
All right, pause it for a second. I just want to just leave it there. Okay, all his research is about, supposedly that he's read about or whatever, is about people going on disability and their world shrinking. Now, what's amazing about this is that it never occurs to him hey, wait a second. Why if someone's too sick to work or too hurt to work, why do they have to sell their car?
Austerity time.
Why do we live in a society where that person has to downgrade their expectations of their lives? Now he's about to make the analogy that if you've been out of work because of COVID, you don't want to go in because it's you can get sick or whatever, your business that hired you shut down, and so you're on unemployment. It doesn't occur to them well, maybe what that person's doing is going out and actually hanging out with other friends. Maybe they're going out and doing stuff, or maybe they're pursuing other dreams, or maybe they're saying, you know what, I can afford to get a better job. Because we have record low unemployment at this point. I mean, everything you're saying is completely incidentally, without basis in any type of fact. Aside from their theories that they're making up in their head being completely twisted and demented, the share of people working at this time in terms of eligible workers. There was a decent amount of people who are like, oh, I'm 55 or I'm 60 or I'm 58. I'm going to retire now.
Right.
I'm going to go into early retirement. But in terms of like eligible workers working, we are completely firmly planted in normal territory. So everything they're saying is, in addition to being factually wrong, their theories are twisted. But just listen to where he's going with this. Again, two people with hundreds of millions of dollars who everyone they come in contact with is on the payroll. Everyone. Everyone they come in contact with is on their payroll.
Lockdown, that when that was over, it was going to look like that movie Grease when school was out and they had the carnival and everybody came running out of the end of the deal. They were running around. They thought that was what it was going to be like.
Incidentally, pause it for 1 second. I'm old enough to know what he's talking about. But that movie was released in something like, what was it, 1978?
I think it was like, yeah.
That's even. Oh yeah, it was about the 50s and 60s.
Oh,
Yeah,
rest,
1978.
rest in peace, Olivia Newton-John, incidentally.
What was it going to be like when the lockdown was over? But it wasn't. You know, people came out and what they used to take for granted was kind of intimidating. They were like, is it okay to be out here? What are we going to do? They didn't want to go back to work. It gets intimidating.
Pause it for 1 second. One of the reasons why people might have been intimidated was like, hey, wait a second. How come we still have 300, 400, 500 people a day dying?
Yeah, what happened to Barry?
And at least 1.1, probably more, died. And people are looking around going like, I feel a little tentative.
Yeah, it's the people Rogan is upset won't work because of UBI that faced the most amount of deaths during COVID.
It's intimidating. So they get used to it and they get comfortable. I was shocked when people said, what happened to the supply chain? Well, you paid people more money not to work than to work. They gave them unemployment plus a bonus.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, this is just like the amount of absolute stupidity coming out of this guy's mouth. The supply chain problem was not a function of people not going to work at the McDonald's or at the hardware store here. He doesn't understand what supply chain means. The supply chain problem was a huge part out of China where they shut down stuff because of COVID, because people could die. The supply chain problem was because shipping containers were sent to different parts of the world so that PPP and supplies could go to places that it didn't normally go and cost 5, 6, 7, 10 times more to get out. Supply chain problems happened because refineries cut refinement production because they weren't selling, because capitalists want to maximize their profits. People got laid off from these companies because they didn't want to expend the money to keep them on when they weren't making the same amount of volume of goods and getting the same profits. The supply chain problem had nothing to do with people getting paid from the government to not go to work, to get extended unemployment. The supply chain problems happened because capitalists did not want to expend money when they weren't getting the same rate of profits, same rate of returns. Nothing to do with increase in unemployment provisions. In fact, without those extension of unemployments, people wouldn't be able to buy stuff, and the same thing would have been doubled down.
You're right.
Good. From unemployment plus a bonus, and then a bonus on top of the bonus. Plus, they didn't have the money for the commute, and gas was $7 a gallon in California. You remember that? It was $7 a gallon there, and so they thought, well, I don't have to spend $200 a week on gas, and I can sit here. Well, that's what happened to supply chain. Nobody wanted to work. Their world shrunk down, and the problem in America, and I talk about it in a section in the book, is not income inequality, but income equality. If you look at the bottom 20% and compare them to the middle 20% of the distribution, The difference, the bottom 20%, only 5% work full-time. The middle 20%, 95% work full-time. And the difference in their incomes is single-digit thousands because of all the entitlement programs.
Oh my
for the bottom 5%.
God, how effing twisted is this?
These rich assholes.
He's complaining because the people in go pull up the stats of what the second quintile of income is in this country. He's saying that the problem is that the people who are making like $12,000, $16,000, $9,000 a year are only like $5,000 or $6,000 less than the people in the next quintile. Like, he doesn't realize, like, he is so out of touch. He doesn't realize at all. Can you pop this up? Yeah, pop it up on the screen. This is just so twisted. Well, you look at what the difference is that he's talking about here. Okay. Lowest quintile. The mean is $12,000. The second quintile is $34,000. Now, aside from him articulating a lie about the difference between those quintiles, to him, the idea of $22,000 annually is completely irrelevant. He's saying that those people are making $12,000 a year, right? Because they're working whatever 5% of the time. I don't trust the statistics, but even if I stipulate that what he's saying is true, they may be getting like another $7,000 or $8,000 in food assistance, and he's like, "This is the problem."
Yeah, the problem.
They're living too large on SNAP.
Says the $95 million a year fake doctor. I mean, good Lord, just to say, hey, look, you middle class people, basically. I know you might be upset by people like me and Joe Rogan having all this money, but really it's the people right beneath you.
It is.
And if it was just wasn't for them, you would be doing much better.
And
I love it, Jack.
He's also, exactly. So, because this works two ways, right? Because he's both sort of obscuring the levels of poverty that the vast majority of this country live in. Because you could add up that bottom quintile, the next quintile, and the next quintile, and they don't have like even remotely close to the amount of money that maybe the two of them in that room have. That's a slight exaggeration, but at the club where he goes to smoke his cigars, it's pretty close. When we talk about wealth inequality, we are talking about first guys like them. Billionaires,
yep.
Then these guys. The difference between the third quintile, even the fourth quintile, and the first quintile is nothing compared to people in the fourth quintile and these guys.
He has an $18 million yacht called Bad Romance, does Dr. Phil.
It's unbelievable. And he's saying that the people who make $12,000 a year have too much money.
It's sick.
Go ahead.
Bottom 5%. Food stamps, unemployment, rent subsidies. There are 100 programs. And when you get all of that money that they get for free, the difference between them and these that work 95% of the time is single-digit thousands. How crazy is that?
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, show us the numbers. It's 34,000 versus 18,000.
It doesn't incentivize you to do anything different. Why would you want to bust your ass all day, logically, doing a job that you hate, traveling, commuting, spending all that money on gas, when you can make a real similar amount doing nothing?
It undermines a meritocracy. The point is, if you're working in that middle 20% and you work hard, then you might wind up in the next 20%. And now all of a sudden, there's a bigger difference. And,
oh, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
That's why we've got all of these quiet quitters and lazy girl jobs and all that stuff out there that's really taken off on the internet.
Unbelievable.
beautiful, honestly, to hear rich people talk about this and think it's like this is for mass consumption.
Like it is so poetic to watch these multi-hundred millionaires bemoan the fact that people with $12,000 are getting food stamps. Food stamps. That people are getting unemployment. Like, we're at one of the lowest rates of unemployment in the history of the country. And they're complaining about food.
And rent subsidy.
It's just unbelievable. They have no, I can't imagine they understand how disgusting they are.
No idea, I don't think. And like Joe Rogan, $250 million from Spotify. Spotify just fired 1,500 people. If those 1,500 people make about $8,500 a year, that's about half that they just gave for Joe Rogan. So, you know, hope you enjoy your severance.
All right. We went a little long on that. Sorry, folks. God, so disgusting. I want to book him.
Dr. Phil?
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to book him.
He's making the rounds.
He must be with his book. I'm really interested in his book. All right, folks, I apologize. We've had people hanging on the phone for a long time. I screwed up. Sorry. Appreciate the folks hanging on the line. I'm sorry. I promise. Friday we'll take calls. I'm gonna cancel the guest that we had booked. Who was a world famous, I mean, one of the biggest guests we ever had. Ever booked on the show.
Dorsey, I would, there's a good recommendation in the chat for a title for that, Millionaires, Gaslight, Middle Class into Hating Poor.
Yes.